They say the house remembers. Maybe that's why, even before the turkey was in the oven, I felt it. That stillness, not peaceful, not even lonely, just the kind of silence that shows up after years of setting a table no one thanks you for. If you've ever looked at a folded napkin and felt like it was the only one holding everything together, stay. This isn't a loud revenge story. It's something softer and sadder, the kind of quiet tale that might sound like yours. The night before Thanksgiving, I ironed the old tablecloth, the cream one with golden maple leaves stitched along the border, slightly faded now, but still beautiful when the light hit it just right. My late husband used to tease me for saving it only for real holidays. But Thanksgiving was always sacred to me. I smoothed the fabric across the long oak table, the same table where Mark used to sit swinging his little legs under the chair, asking me every 5 minutes if the pie was ready yet. Back then, he liked pumpkin. Now it was pecan, because Jenna liked pecan. Or maybe he just stopped caring. It had been years since he requested anything. Still, I made both. I always made both, just in case. I started cooking that morning around 6. Cranberries simmered with orange zest. The turkey was brined and drying in the fridge, and the stuffing mix sat in a ceramic bowl by the window. I'd even printed out place cards this year. Silly, maybe, but I remembered how much Ella, my granddaughter, liked seeing her name in cursive. My knees ached, and I had to sit more often than I used to, but I kept moving. Not for me, for the memory of what Thanksgiving used to be, for the hope that maybe this year Mark would remember. I hadn't seen him in person since Easter. He'd mentioned things were hectic, that Jenna's family was visiting more often now, and that the kids had so much going on. I understood. At least I told myself I did. But something in me still believed, hoped, that he would come home. Even if just for pie. Even if just to say thanks. At 10:15 a.m., my phone buzzed. I smiled. It was him. Mark. Hey Mom, don't go overboard today, just rest. We'll handle things this year. I typed back a thumbs up emoji. Didn't say much, didn't ask questions. I had already prepped the sweet potatoes, set out the good dishes, and hung the wooden thankful sign on the front door. I did too much. I always did. But that's what you do when you're the mother, the anchor. You do too much for too long, hoping someone notices before it breaks you. The day moved like it always did. By 2:00 p.m., the house was filled with the smell of rosemary, brown sugar, and cinnamon. The pie crusts had cooled, and I tied each napkin with twine and a dried orange slice, like I'd seen in a magazine once. I even dug out the old vinyl records, Nat King Cole, of course. I lit the fireplace early. The flames made shadows flicker across the photo of Mark at age 7, holding a turkey leg with a grin too big for his face. That photo lived on the mantel all year round. Outside, the air was crisp, and the pine trees along the ridge swayed like they knew something was coming. I glanced at the clock. 2:47 p.m. Still early. I didn't panic. By 3:30, everything was done. Turkey resting, dishes covered, rolls warming in the oven, wine chilled. I stood at the window, apron still on, and watched as a neighbor pulled into their driveway with arms full of pie. Laughter poured out of their car like warm cider. I smiled at first, then quickly turned away. The table had 8 chairs. Only one had been sat in. Mine. I sat down. Not to eat, not yet, but just to breathe. To hold the moment in place long enough to pretend it still meant something. The clock ticked steadily from the wall. The same clock Mark made in woodshop class during his junior year. He gave it to me with a crooked smile and a proud, I didn't even need help. I'd kept it ticking all these years. Kept it alive, like everything else he left behind. The quiet wasn't loud. It was heavier than that, thicker. It settled on my shoulders like a question I didn't want to ask. What happens when the one who raised everyone gets left behind? By 4:15, I stopped pretending. I carved a few slices from the turkey, not because I was hungry, but because some rituals are harder to let go of than people. I poured a glass of wine and didn't drink it. I put Ella's name card back in the drawer. The cinnamon sticks in the centerpiece were starting to dry out, and still, no knock, no headlights, no voices, no Mark. I wish I could say I got angry, that I threw a plate, that I called him and demanded to know what kind of son forgets the mother who fed him for decades. But I didn't. I just sat there, napkin in my lap, with a silence inside me deeper than the snow that hadn't even started falling yet. Because the truth is, it wasn't about being forgotten for a dinner. It was about everything I had ever done, every pie, every bandage, every night I stayed up when he was sick, being so easy to erase, like it didn't count anymore, like it was owed, like it was invisible. That night, after packing the food into plastic containers and wiping down the empty table, I walked to the back room and pulled out a box I hadn't touched in years. It was where I kept the original deed to the house, back when it had only my name and my husband's on it. I held the folder in my lap and didn't open it. Not yet. Because something had shifted in me that day. It wasn't rage. It wasn't heartbreak. It was the quiet knowing that the house no longer held the people I built it for. And maybe, just maybe, it didn't need to anymore. I didn't hear from Mark the next morning. Not even a text. The cranberry sauce still sat in the fridge, untouched. The stuffing, sealed up tight, waited for mouths that never came. I made coffee like I always did. French press. My husband's favorite. It used to be mine too, before drinking it alone became routine. There was frost on the kitchen window, feathering outward like veins across a forgotten heart. I stood there longer than usual, one hand on the counter, the other holding my mug, letting the steam rise into my face like a kind of veil. I wasn't crying. Not yet. I'd grown too tired for tears. What I felt was heavier than that. It was the ache of being erased without anyone saying the words. That's the thing no one tells you. When people stop showing up, they usually don't say it out loud. They just stop, one missed visit at a time, one next year at a time. And then eventually, you're just off the list. I walked to the back room and took out the folder again. I told myself I was just organizing, maybe making space in the file drawer. But deep down, I already knew what I was looking for. There it was, a document I had signed sometime last fall. Mark brought it over after Jenna's mom had a minor stroke. He'd said, "It's just to make things easier, Mom. In case something happens, I can help handle the bills, the taxes." I remembered sitting on the couch, handing him my pen. He said he already had most of it filled out. I just needed to sign. Back then, I still believed love meant yes. I scanned the line that mattered. Co-ownership assignment, Mark Taylor and Jenna Taylor. My name was listed second, almost like a guest. I reread it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand, but because I couldn't believe I had let this happen. Not out of ignorance, out of love. Blind, eager to please love. The kind that thinks saying yes is always the kind thing. The kind that forgets how easily kindness gets mistaken for permission. I called the county office later that afternoon. I told them I was just updating records, but the clerk on the other end pulled up the property status without hesitation. Yes, the home had recently been updated to dual ownership. Yes, there was a pending pre-listing assessment for sale purposes, filed by Mark Taylor. The woman didn't say much else. She didn't have to. I didn't scream, didn't storm down to Mark's house, didn't call him, demanding why the child I carried in my own body was now trying to cut me out of the home I built. Instead, I sat back in my chair, both hands in my lap, and listened to the quiet that followed. Some of you may know that silence, the one that doesn't come from peace, but from the kind of betrayal that doesn't even feel dramatic. It just lands, quiet, precise. Like the moment you realize your place at the table no longer exists. If you've ever felt that, if you've ever gone from beloved to burdened without anyone saying it to your face, leave me a word in the comments. Not a whole story, just a word. One word that describes what you carried and who forgot to say thank you. You never know who else might read it and feel a little less alone. Later that evening, I took a walk behind the house. The pine trees along the edge of the property were dusted with frost. The air bit at my cheeks, but it felt good to feel something, anything. I stood at the edge of the clearing and stared out at the old swing set Mark used to run to as a boy. It hadn't been used in years, but I never took it down. Even when the chains rusted, even when the seat cracked from sun and snow, because part of me still held the shape of the boy he once was. The one who brought me crumpled dandelions, the one who begged for one more story before bed, the one who used to cry if I left him too long in the grocery store aisle. Where had that boy gone? Back inside, I opened the drawer where I kept my recipe cards. Not the digital ones, the real ones, handwritten, faded, smudged with sauce and age. One of them was from my mother. Pumpkin bread with cinnamon sugar top. It was folded in half, barely legible now. I hadn't made that recipe in years. It struck me then, how many of my traditions had been quietly pushed out, not by violence, not even by malice, just replaced. Jenna brought store-bought pies now. Mark liked her stuffing better. And Thanksgiving? Well, apparently that could just be skipped if the other side of the family had better scenery. I didn't sleep much that night, but I didn't cry either. Instead, I sat at the table, no candles, no music, and stared at the empty chair across from me. That chair had once been filled by my husband, then, for a time, by Mark. Later, Ella swinging her legs and asking for extra whipped cream. Now, it was just a chair, and somehow that felt like the most honest thing in the house. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't always crash in like a storm. Sometimes it seeps in, quiet, polite. It wears familiar shoes and speaks in a voice you once loved. And by the time you realize it's betrayal, it's already rearranged the furniture and started calling your house theirs. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I stood in my kitchen and couldn't remember what I came in for. Maybe a towel, maybe the pills I forgot to take. Or maybe I just needed to feel like I still belonged in a room that used to carry the sound of my name being spoken. It was still tidy. The dishes had been put away, the pies were gone, given to neighbors, the leftovers sealed and stacked in the freezer like evidence I couldn't bear to look at. Everything looked normal, but the house didn't feel like mine anymore. And the awful part was, it legally wasn't. That night, I didn't light the fireplace. I didn't turn on the little twinkle lights over the kitchen sink. The warmth I used to pour into this place had started to feel like I was tending someone else's garden. Mark's garden, Jenna's too. I passed by the mantel and stopped in front of our wedding photo. My husband had been gone for 12 years. I traced his face with my finger. He would have seen through this. He wouldn't have signed anything without reading every line. He would have said, "Honey, protect what's yours. They don't mean harm now, but one day convenience will make them careless." I didn't listen. I trusted love more than caution. The next morning, I called the lawyer who handled our estate years ago. They said he'd retired. Of course he had. Everything stable in my life seemed to have gone quiet. Around noon, I sat on the back steps with a cup of lukewarm tea and watched the wind move through the pine trees. It was the kind of cold that wrapped around your knees first, slow and aching. A squirrel darted across the yard, chased by nothing, and I thought, me too. I was running in circles, protecting something no one wanted anymore, except to claim it for themselves. I went back inside and opened the drawer where I kept old cards, birthdays, anniversaries, Mother's Days. There were 22 cards from Mark. The last one had been 5 years ago, generic. No personal message, just love Mark and Jenna. It used to be love Mark. That N felt like a blade, like an erasure. Like I'd been demoted. That afternoon, I sat down at the dining table and laid out every paper from the property folder. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe proof that I hadn't imagined all of this. Maybe just some thread of control to hold on to. And that's when I found it, tucked in the back sleeve, a marketing sheet from a real estate agent outlining strong sale potential and projected pricing for winter listings. It had today's date, printed, deliberate. They were planning to list the house soon. I stared at the page until the numbers blurred. $387,000 estimated value. 3-bedroom cabin. Ideal for vacation rental or Airbnb potential. My home, where I had tucked in a sick toddler, where my husband had read the paper every Sunday, where I buried my grief after losing him alone, but safely surrounded by the memories I could still touch. Now it was just a line on someone's investment portfolio. I didn't make dinner that night, didn't even wash the cup from earlier. I left it in the sink like a signal. Something is broken, and I don't know if I want to fix it. At around 7:00 p.m., my phone rang. I looked down. Mark, I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to hear his voice, but because I knew I couldn't trust what came with it anymore. He left a voicemail. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Hope Thanksgiving wasn't too lonely. Jenna's folks had this amazing honey-baked ham. Totally forgot to send you pics. Anyway, let's talk this weekend. Maybe we can come by and help clean out the attic or something." The attic, the one filled with my husband's boxes, my recipe books, his tools. What did they plan to do with the attic? Stage it for showings? Toss what they couldn't sell? I sat in the dark for a long time after that. No music, no TV, just the soft, uneven breathing of someone realizing their child had started to count them out. And not out of hate. That would have been easier. Out of convenience. Which is worse. Because convenience doesn't even feel bad about it. There's a moment, not loud or dramatic, when you finally understand they're not coming back for you, not the version of you that raised them, not the woman who sewed buttons and signed permission slips and stayed up during stomach bugs. That woman was left behind, and no one said goodbye. I crawled into bed that night still wearing my slippers. Didn't brush my hair, didn't set an alarm. There was nothing to get up early for. The quiet pressed against the door like fog, thick, invisible, everywhere. I stared at the ceiling and whispered, "I gave them everything." No one answered. The morning after the voicemail, I sat at the dining table for 2 full hours before I moved, not reading, not writing, just sitting. The light from the window crept across the floorboard slowly, like it didn't want to intrude. I stared at a small crack in the hardwood I'd never noticed before. Funny how the eye starts to see things only after the heart has been broken open. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't showered. I just sat there letting the weight of everything settle, not like a storm, but like dust on furniture that hasn't been touched in years. I had always believed that love and trust were the same thing, that saying yes to your child was an act of love, that if you were generous enough, kind enough, steady enough, you'd be safe, you'd be valued. But safety, it turns out, doesn't live in the paperwork. It lives in how people remember you. And Mark hadn't remembered me. Not when he signed the papers, not when he made the listing, not even when he left a voicemail that talked about ham, but not about how I was doing. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed too bright at first. I squinted and clicked through to the shared documents folder. Mark had set it up for me years ago, said it was easier to help manage things. Inside, I found what I didn't want to see, a spreadsheet titled Marlene Transition Plan, updated 3 weeks ago. Rows and rows of bullet points. Clear attic by Jan 15. Prep kitchen for light Reno. Discuss assisted living options. Spring 2024. Get quote on moving van. Local. Cabin viewing. Waterjenna. Breckenridge. Feb tentative. I sat back like someone had punched me in the chest. They weren't just easing me out. They were moving on without me. And the worst part? They didn't think they were doing anything wrong. I closed the laptop, got up, walked to the kitchen, stared at the old tea kettle I'd had since 1986. The handle was a little loose. The whistle didn't work anymore, but it had lasted. Like me, I turned it on anyway, and for the first time in days, I whispered something out loud. This ends now. Not out of anger, not revenge, just clarity. A kind of awakening that doesn't make you stronger, but makes you stop shrinking. That afternoon, I opened the hallway closet and pulled out the small metal lockbox I hadn't touched in years. It still smelled faintly of dust and cedar. Inside was my husband's will, a copy of the original deed, letters he had written me during his hospital stay, and a list of contacts he left me labeled, "If you ever feel something's wrong, Call these people. I ran my finger down the page until I found a name I hadn't read in a long time. Catherine Leland, his old friend, an estate consultant. I didn't call that day. I wasn't ready, but I placed the list on the kitchen counter, right next to the mug Mark had once given me on Mother's Day. It read, "Best Mom Ever." That mug hadn't been used in over a year. Later that evening, I walked out to the back porch. The air was sharper than usual. The wind carried a silence that felt different now, not empty, but cleared, like something had left the space. I thought about the day I first walked into this house. Fresh paint, still echoing. I'd filled every corner of it with life. Birthday streamers, homework on the fridge, casseroles, laughter, arguments, morning coffee, sleepless nights, dancing barefoot to Motown when no one was looking. This wasn't just a house. This was a life. And somehow, I'd allowed it to be turned into an asset on someone else's spreadsheet. That was my mistake. I came back inside and pulled out my notebook, wrote down a list. Check deed, find new attorney, review all accounts, call Catherine, no more waiting. Then I tore out the page, folded it neatly, and placed it in my coat pocket. That night, I brushed my hair, washed my face, lit a candle by the bedside. Not because anyone was coming, but because I was still here. I turned down the photo of Mark on my nightstand, not to punish him, but because I finally understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. The love I had given him was never meant to be currency. It wasn't a down payment on loyalty. It wasn't a deposit he could withdraw from. It wasn't a reason to keep my name on anything. If you've ever looked at a life you built, patiently, lovingly, every single day, and realized someone else now claims it like it's theirs, then you know this kind of ache. You know what it means to be replaced without discussion. You know what it means to have your picture still on the wall, but your name off the deed. You know how heavy it feels to stop waiting. But maybe you also know, like I do now, how freeing it is to finally stop shrinking yourself to fit inside someone else's idea of what's best for you. That night, for the first time in a very long while, I locked the door, not out of fear, but because I finally knew what I was locking out. And it wasn't a person, it was permission. The next morning, I made my bed with slow hands. It wasn't because anyone was coming over, no guests, no visits scheduled, just me, in my quiet room, folding the corners of the blanket like I had for decades. But something about the act felt different, not like a chore, more like a claim, a silent way of saying, "This is still mine." I made oatmeal for breakfast, just plain with a little brown sugar, no cinnamon. Mark had always hated it, so I stopped using it long ago. That morning, I added a sprinkle of cinnamon back in. Small thing, but I noticed it. I sat by the window with my bowl, watching the sun rise through the pine trees. The light moved across the porch, soft and golden, touching the swing that hadn't held anyone in years. For the first time, I didn't feel the ache of waiting. I didn't wonder if someone would come sit beside me. I just sat and breathed and ate slowly. After breakfast, I pulled out the envelope from the kitchen drawer, the one with the handwritten contact, Catherine Leland. I called. She answered on the third ring. Her voice hadn't changed. Still calm, still low, the kind of voice that knows how to listen before it speaks. "I think I need to take my name back," I said simply. She didn't ask for details. She just asked, "When can we meet?" That Friday, I drove to her office in town. I wore my gray wool coat and the scarf my husband gave me years ago, the one I'd kept folded in the top drawer for special days. I don't know why I chose that one. Maybe because I needed a reminder that someone had once protected me without needing to control me. Catherine greeted me with a hug. She didn't offer pity, just warmth, the good kind. We sat at a round table, not across from each other, but side by side. I handed her the folder, the real estate pre-listing, the co-ownership form I'd signed, the spreadsheet I found in the cloud, the list titled Transition Plan. She read everything, took notes, asked questions when she needed to, never made me feel stupid. When she was done, she looked at me and said softly, "You haven't lost everything, Marlene. Not even close." I felt my throat tighten. Over the next 2 weeks, we worked in quiet. She filed paperwork to reverse the co-ownership, citing misleading authorization. She helped me close the shared accounts. We froze the property listing, and I started packing. Not the whole house, not yet. Just small things, the things that mattered. A photograph of me in college, before I was a mother. My mother's cake tin with the dented lid, a book of pressed flowers from the year Mark was born. The first Christmas ornament my husband ever bought me. I wrapped each item carefully, not because I was moving out, but because I was moving in, to myself again. One afternoon, while boxing up winter linens, I found a stack of thank you cards I'd bought for no reason last year. Still blank, still beautiful. I wrote one to myself. Dear Marlene, you waited, you hoped, you held on longer than anyone knew, and still you stayed kind, but kindness isn't the same as staying silent. Welcome back. Love. Me, I placed it on the mantle, right next to the clock Mark made in shop class. I didn't move the clock, I didn't throw it out, but I didn't wind it either. Some things don't need to keep ticking to be remembered. A week later, the papers came through. The house was officially back in my name. No drama, no confrontation, no permission asked. Just a notary seal on the corner and the quiet return of what had always been mine. Mark texted the next day. Hey, tried to log into the docs. Password changed? I didn't reply. An hour later, he followed up. Everything okay? Still, I said nothing. Not because I was trying to punish him, but because some silence is not the absence of love. It's the boundary love requires. That weekend, I sat with Catherine again. We went over options. I could stay, I could sell, I could lease it, or I could downsize on my terms. We didn't make decisions, we just made space. That alone felt like freedom. The wind blew harder that night. I lit a fire. Not because it was cold, but because I wanted to. I poured myself a glass of wine, something I hadn't done since my birthday 2 years ago. I toasted the quiet, not the loneliness, but the return of a voice I thought I'd lost, my own. If you've ever spent your life giving only to realize no one remembered what it cost you, if you've ever had to rebuild, not because everything burned down, but because someone tried to sell the roof right out from under you, then maybe you know this feeling, this quiet power, this calm resolve, this moment when you realize you're no longer afraid of walking alone because you know you're not lost. The for sale sign never went up. I'd asked for that specifically. No boards, no open house, no neighbors peeking through the hedges. When you've built a life in silence, you don't need an audience when it ends. Catherine had introduced me to a quiet buyer, a retired couple from New Mexico. No kids, just wanted trees, space, and a porch swing. They said the house felt lived in but gently. I liked that. We shook hands. I signed papers. I didn't cry. The morning of the walkthrough, I baked a small apple tart. Not for them, not really. Just to let the house smell like love one more time. I walked through each room one last time. The kitchen still echoed the memory of morning pancakes. The hallway still had the faint pencil marks of Mark's height charted from age 4 to 10. The bathroom mirror had a scratch in the corner. I remembered how it happened. He was brushing his teeth and dancing to a song from the radio. I smiled, then turned off the light. That afternoon, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees and the key tucked into a small white envelope. It had taken me a long time to put it there, to surrender it without resentment, because what I felt now wasn't loss. It was completion. The sound of tires on gravel broke the silence. I didn't have to look up. I knew it was him, same car, same rhythm of door opening, same hesitation in the footsteps. Mark. He walked to the bottom of the porch steps, hands in his jacket pockets like a teenager caught sneaking in late. "Mom," he said, soft. I didn't answer. I let the wind fill the silence between us. He looked at the front of the house, then at the flower bed I'd cleared just last week. I heard you sold the house." I nodded once. He waited for me to say more, but I didn't. Then came the line I'd expected. "Don't you think it's kind of sudden? I mean, this is the family house." I turned to him slowly. "No, Mark," I said, voice calm. It was the family house. But you forgot that while I was still in it." He blinked, tried to smile like it might soften the edges. "We were never trying to hurt you." "I know," I said, "but you did." He walked up one step. I raised a hand, gently. That was enough. His shoulders dropped. He looked older to me somehow. Not wiser, just more aware of what he'd lost, even if he couldn't name it. "There's still time, you know," he offered, "to talk, to fix things." I nodded again, but I didn't say yes, because fixing something requires that both people see the break, and he still didn't see it. I stood up, folded the blanket, and placed it on the bench. "I'm going now," I said simply. "Where?" he asked. I looked past him, toward the pine trees, the road, the open sky. Somewhere I don't have to ask to keep what I've already built. He didn't follow. He didn't call out. He just stood there, watching me walk down the steps and hand the envelope to the agent waiting by the car. The last time I turned the key in the ignition of that driveway, I didn't look in the rear-view mirror. Not once. Because when you leave something that never truly saw you, there's no need to wave goodbye. The new place wasn't fancy. Just a small white cottage near the edge of town with blue shutters and a porch that got good morning light. No one had lived there in a while. But I liked that. It meant the space hadn't yet learned to forget anyone. I unpacked slowly over the next week, hung up one picture of my husband, placed a book on the side table, planted rosemary in a pot on the windowsill. Little things, but all mine. One day, a letter came, not from Mark, from Ella, my granddaughter. A single page. She wrote, "I miss your pie. I didn't know how Thanksgiving really worked until it didn't happen." I cried. Not from sadness, but because someone had noticed the silence. And that was enough. I never told Mark where I moved, not out of cruelty, but because I'd finally built a place where my name belonged on the deed, and no one, no well-meaning spreadsheet, no forgotten voicemail, would ever move me off it again. Some evenings I still sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the sky change color behind the trees, and I don't feel erased. I feel settled. I feel real. I feel like I came back to someone who had been waiting all along. Me. If you stayed with me until now, thank you. If you've ever been forgotten, rewritten, or replaced, and somehow quietly, gently, found your way back to yourself, leave me a small word in the comments, just one word, no explanation, no need for noise. Someone else reading it might recognize themselves in your quiet, and maybe, just maybe, that will be enough.